These are the top 8 urban legends of New York City that just might be true. Number 8. For most of us, living the high life in a penthouse that overlooked New York would be a blessing, but in the case of 57 West 57th Street, it just might be a curse. Edna Crawford was a young showgirl who married multimillionaire Albert Champion. Champion made his fortune in spark plugs by first founding the Champion Spark Plug Company. Due to a falling out with the backers, he left the company to create AC Delco. The two companies still exist to this day. According to my research, while in Paris, Champion was escorting his young wife to the dance floor at the Hotel Maurice when he collapsed and died of a heart attack. Other stories claim that Edna's French lover, Charles Brazel, had something to do with his death. That when Champion found the two of them together at the Crayon bar, there was a violent confrontation between the two men, and Champion was found dead a few hours later in his hotel room. What we do know for sure is instead of being able to divorce the cheater, Champion died and left her $15 million. Edna and Brazel took their newfound wrenches, and at Brazel's behest, they bought the Medical Arts Building at 57 West 57th Street for $1.3 million in cash. Brazel was paranoid and kept Edna prisoner in the building. One night, in a rage, Brazel beat Edna to death with a telephone. Guards tossed him out of the penthouse window. But the story doesn't end there. This is only when the curse began. Carlton Alsop moved in with his wife. The poor man was soon plagued by violent images and haunting sounds, including arguments of the now deceased former tenants. These events were so horrific, Alsop's wife left him, and not long after he was committed to an insane asylum. Number 7. If you live in a large city, then you probably have heard of mole people. Most large cities have homeless or tunnel dwellers living in abandoned subways, railroad, flood, and sewage tunnels. Even here in my city of Las Vegas, there's an estimated 1,000 people who live in the storm drains who are seeking shelter from the sweltering heat or the freezing cold. But the term mole people refers to a different class of people. These are not only people living underground. Groups of people form small and ordered societies. There could be hundreds at any time, living not quite off the grid. Societies who have created their own cultures and are connecting illegally into the city's mainframes. This topic has intrigued sociologists, and while there is clear evidence of people living underground, these mole people societies have proven to be still just an urban legend. Jennifer Toth's book, The Mole People: Life in the Tunnels Beneath New York City, came out in 1993. The book investigated the claims, and according to her, there are definitely established communities of homeless people living beneath the streets of New York. However, her work has since been questioned due to unverifiable claims she has made, as well as her work being filled with numerous factual errors. There's an inherent danger living in any city's underground system. Las Vegas is prone to flash flooding during our monsoon season. Yes, we actually have what is called a monsoon season. An article in the Huffington Post covered the perils the tunnel dwellers face in light of Hurricane Sandy's approach. There's no telling how many lives were lost that day and the unaccounted for. Those who chose to live an anonymous existence. Number 7. There's a bridge that crosses the East River named Hellgate Bridge, where during the middle of the night, a ghost train is said to cross. Witnesses who have climbed the structure have reported seeing strange lights racing towards them, but those lights always seem to vanish into thin air before reaching them. Others have seen a rickety old train that clearly is battered and on its way to its own grave, drifting slowly over the river, filled with passengers. Not really physical beings, but the ghosts of countless victims died in the dark waters below. These poor damned souls of explorers, suicides, murder victims, all sitting side by side, riding their own crazy train to hell. Number 5. Sometime around 1950, in all the hustle and bustle that is Times Square, suddenly out of nowhere a man appeared. This event was purported to have been witnessed by many locals and tourists. The man was clearly out of his element. Even his wardrobe was from a different era. His dress was clearly a Victorian style, and he had mutton chops. The man was confused and disoriented, and before anyone could help him, he was hit by a taxi and killed. As if this wasn't all strange enough, when the man's body arrived at the morgue, the attendants there cataloged all his belongings. Inside his pockets were old banknotes and letters dated 1876, along with some business cards with the name Rudolph Fentz Jr. apparently all looked as if they hadn't aged a day. But too bad, none of it's true. This story is based on a short story written by Jack Finney, published in 1951 as part of an anthology. A few years later, another writer named Ralph Holland printed this story without permission and without any indication that it was purely fiction. Over the years, the story has become accepted as fact, continues to be misrepresented on the internet to this day. You believe in time travel? Number 4. What if an urban legend wasn't a legend? What if the monster your parents always warned you about turned out to be real? That is what happened in the legend of Cropsey. On Staten Island, there was a legend of an escaped mental patient who lived in the abandoned Willowbrook State School. This real-life monster, who in some stories had a hook for a hand, and in others carried an axe dripping from the blood of his last victim. He was called Cropsey, and he would come out at night and snatch children off the streets. Willowbrook was already notorious due to an expose done in 1972 by a then relatively unknown investigative reporter by the name of Geraldo Rivera. The expose was titled Willowbrook, The Last Great Disgrace, and exposed the deplorable conditions that children with intellectual disabilities were living under. The facility closed in 1983, but the children started to go missing long before that. It all began in 1972 when 9-year-old Alice Pereira and her brother, playing in the lobby of their building, left alone for just a brief moment by a brother. Alice disappeared and was never seen or heard from again. Then, in 1981, there was 7-year-old Holly Ann Hughes, who was abducted while on her way to a local store with a friend to get some candy. In 1983, 11-year-old Tyhisha Jackson was reported missing after she failed to return from the grocery store. Then in 1984, it was Hank Gaffario, 22-year-old intellectually disabled man who went missing. Then yet again, on July 9th, 1987, Jennifer Schweiger, a young lady born with Down syndrome, was reported missing. Her body was found 35 days later in a shallow grave in the area surrounding Willowbrook. These 5 victims in the school all had one thing in common. This man, Andre Rand, aka Frank Russian. Andre worked as a custodian at Willowbrook in the mid-60s and was either seen with the victims before they disappeared, or there was pretty strong circumstantial evidence that connected him to the crimes. In the case of Alice Pereira, he was a prime suspect due to his past criminal record. In the case of Holly Ann Hughes, Rand was identified as the man who pulled her into his Volkswagen, as well as having been seen with the little girl by several eyewitnesses. Rand admitted to playing hide-and-go-seek with Holly on the day she went missing, but claimed he had nothing to do with her disappearance. When Tyhisha Jackson went missing, Rand had just been released from prison 12 days earlier. He was questioned in the case but never charged. In Hank Gaffario's case, Hank not only at one time lived just a few doors away from Rand, but eyewitnesses also placed him with Rand at a local diner the morning he disappeared. Jennifer Schweiger's body was discovered on the grounds of Willowbrook, so was a campsite of Rand's. They finally charged him with kidnapping and first-degree murder of Jennifer Schweiger, but the jury only convicted him of the kidnapping. Rand was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison and expected to be paroled in 2008 if no other charges were brought forth. But in 2004, Rand was brought back to trial for the kidnapping of Holly Ann Hughes, but never charged with her murder due to lack of evidence. Rand was convicted of kidnapping Holly and sentenced to another 25 years to life in prison. He will now be eligible for parole in 2037. Rand, as of this recording, is still alive. The suspected serial killer won't taste freedom until the age of 93, if he makes it that long. According to sources close to the man, he claims he and the convicted serial killer Ted Bundy are alike in many ways. Number 3. The Belasco Theater, named after its original owner David Belasco, is located right in the middle of the theater district on Broadway. It is in fact the 6th oldest existing theater on Broadway. Belasco, an actor, manager, and director, was considered a pioneer in the American Little Theater movement, which involved close contact between the actors and audience. He was the first to adapt the short story Madame Butterfly, and was instrumental in launching silent film star Mary Pickford's theatrical career. The man was obsessed with theater. It was said that he spent most, if not all, his waking hours inside the building named after him. After he died in 1931, strange occurrences began to happen at the theater. Apparitions that looked just like Belasco began to appear. A ghostly figure was claimed to even be wearing a clerical collar and cassock just like Belasco did when he was still alive. A look he was so well known for that it garnered him the nicknames the Bishop of Broadway and the Monk. During performances, actors would notice a dark figure watching from the balcony. This figure would then make an attempt to speak to them after the show. Others heard footsteps or doors opening and closing. The elevator would begin to move even when it wasn't in operation. Every day, 4 p.m. on the dot, I'm assuming one of the actor's pets, would begin to growl at an invisible figure. But that's not all. There was even a second ghost, female they called the Blue Lady. Popular theory among the actors was that she was one of Belasco's spirit companions, that his love for women had transcended the physical world and carried over into the spirit world. Number 2. What's the most rat-infested city in the world? New York City. New York beat out India, and a place that was so devastated by rats until they were completely eradicated in 2010 that it was actually named Rat Islands. Officials have said there are most likely over 30 million rats living in the city. Although in the past the city was populated with both brown and black rats, since the mid-1940s, due to its much larger size and aggressive nature, brown rat now dominates the town. Rumors of Goliath-sized rats roaming the streets have persisted for decades. Some have reported seeing rats as big as 3 feet, others claim even larger. Down below the city in the sewage drains, the subway and railroad tunnels, there are rumors of entire colonies with its very own rat king existing. Marine biologists are constantly on the lookout for giant squids. Can you imagine what kind of monster rodent may lurk below? To see one roaming about that is as large as a household cat is normal, and that's not even the most disturbing part of the story. It seems they have absolutely no fear of humans. Then again, what would when it looks like this? Number 1. Finish off this list with the one urban legend that New York is most famous for, and that is colonies of alligators living in the sewers below. How these gators arrived in New York, and in particular the sewer system, depends upon who you ask. They either arrived as pets of former Florida residents who decided to move up north. Now, why they would bring along a pet alligator is beyond me. Or they were given to children as gifts, and in both cases eventually flushed down the toilet when they started to get too big. The legend dates as far back as 1935, when it was reported in a New York Times article that an alligator was found in an uptown sewer. The article told the story of a group of people led by a teenager named Salvatore Cantalucci. The group caught and killed an alligator over 7 feet long that had been discovered beneath an open manhole on 123rd Street near the Harlem River. In another story from the book, The World Beneath the City, that was published in 1959, author Robert Daly interviewed a former sewer inspector by the name of Teddy May, claimed that while working in the sewers, he had encountered alligators of alarming sizes. Even as recently as 2010, Time magazine published an article on its site about a 2-foot-long baby reptile. Alligator, crocodile, it was undetermined, but it was found right in the heart of Queens. No one knows how it got there. According to Animal Care and Control spokesman Richard Gentles, 2 to 4 alligators and reptiles are rescued by his agency in the city every year. Not only are there mole people and giant mutant rats living below the cities,